Welcome to Silicon Valley Asian Business Talk.
Hello, everyone. This is Roger Chen from University of San Francisco, and we are conducting this interview sponsored by University of San Francisco Center for Asia Pacific Studies, short for CAPS. And our guest today is Li Fang, and we want to thank you, Li, for kind of joining our program to share your wisdom, your insights on adopting the enterprise AI system in your company. Please briefly introduce yourself and also your company.
Great. Thank you, Roger. Hi, everyone. My name is Li Fan. I'm currently Chief Technology and AI Officer for Circle Internet Group. For those who don't know, Circle is a global financial technology company building economic operating systems for the internet. We're creating a neutral programmable layer for digital dollars and enable money to move with the same speed, transparency, and security as the information and data to do today. Now, in my role as a technology officer, I manage all the engineers, data scientists, and the tech ops in the company and build the product and services. My another role as an AI officer, I set up the company's AI strategy, and I also lead a small AI team to execute and enable everyone in the company, whether tech or non-tech.
Thank you. Actually, that's such a great background, and we are really looking forward to kind of discuss your experience.
Discussion topic: launching enterprise AI, top-down, training, metrics. Silicon Valley Asian Business Talk.
So before we discuss the details, maybe would you please kind of give us like a big picture about how does your company adopt AI in general, so we have a background for understanding of your AI adoption in your company?
Yeah, so the company has been like really active adopting AI for more than a year. In fact, we'll say from the bottom up, it started 2 years ago when the first ChatGPT really made the wave, and there's a lot of employees from bottom up and asking how can we adopt. Now, early days, it is a little bit tricky because we're in the fintech, it's a heavily regulated space. So the security compliance and including me, technology team, discuss often like how can we do it, but at that time the tooling, the enterprise version is not really ready. So more than 1 year ago, and we thankfully we have the top-down mandate. Our CEO Jeremy Allaire is always a big fan of AI, and he started to make it really official drive. And we discussed to set up the new role for me, and also set up really effort and initiative in the AI. And this is how we started to really top down, not only invest in the resource, but also have a mandate top down, say everyone has to use AI, and we even set up the company goals.
Maybe, that's a, kind of a great starting point. You talked about the, kind of a top-down and a bottom approach. I have several questions. First, where you say, of course, that's extremely important stuff from the top. So specifically from the top down, let's say your CEO, your company that mandates to require different departments to have AI initiative. Can you just give us a little bit more kind of a detailed explanation or maybe example? For example, what is the specific requirement for a certain department to kind of have some AI initiative, or just a very vague, say, hey, your department need to show me some AI initiative, but you figure out. Or different scenario, the top management say, we need you to think about this AI, more directional kind of a requirement. What is the way for top-down to drive this?
Yeah, so we actually have two major track, or you can say three. So the first one is make sure everyone up level the skill. So I remember the first quarter, we literally say now we actually sign up for, at that time, ChatGPT Enterprise version. We bought everyone a seat, and we will say, okay, you have to start to use the ChatGPT, and we have a company-wide training classes, bootcamp, hackathon, and we monitor the activity closely, and we don't really shame anyone, but we keep sharing the percentage, what's the actively daily usage, and what are the great cases people share among themselves, and how to use ChatGPT. That's like a really basic stuff. But then We also have two really deliverables. First is me, like as the Chief Technology Officer for the whole tech org, we want to make sure that engineer, of course, and upfront to utilize AI and of course coding with Cursor, Copilot, and cloud. And we actively monitor what are the code produced and accepted by the engineer, and also eventually how many hours we saved by using AI in terms of closing the bugs or implement a feature. So engineer is separate as because it's the biggest team in the company, and also the upfront in terms of utilize the new tech. For other functions, like you said, we don't want to dictate exactly what you're going to do, but we actually have AI operation team working with every function. So first, the ELT member, the executive member will sit with me and we will sign up, say, this is what we're going to do. Every function, for example, have to produce 2 workflows that we identify, they identify, and we actually agree that this is your most critical and most leveraged by AI workflow. And within a quarter or 2, you will agree that you're going to improve that workflow using AI and have a measurable impact. How you measure this is up to the function, but we, central AI team, will work with them to make sure this is measurable. This is really tied with clear business goal. It's not using AI for the sake of using AI. We really want to make sure there's a business impact there. So it is, every function is different. And for example, as I said, for engineer is the time to close a ticket. A ticket is a bug or the feature launch. For customer service function, they actually decided to say how many hours that you will close a customer reach out email, because there's always customer issue, as you think, and how many manpower you have to invest overall for a month to handle, say, thousands or tens of thousands email from the customer. So both in terms of time and in terms of resource. And that's just one example. Every team produce some metrics.
That is great, actually. So, if I understand it correctly, basically for the engineer side, which is very obvious, you try to kind of use the vibe code to use AI to, partially replace some kind of a coding work. That a lot of discussion now, but I think for me, a more interesting part is the non-engineering side. That basically is the mainstream operation. So it seems to me for the non-engineering part, you have like a general mandate, but you do give different department, different division the freedom to define their own specific AI initiative, and right, and also kind of track that. So I thought it's kind of interesting. But one, and also, I think the other interesting part, maybe to clarify, you do have a centralized team helping different operating departments or divisions for the implementation. So I assume that operating centralized team is providing the technical help, right?
Yes, although I have to say the team was very small. Even today, it's less than 10. It started with like 3 engineers. The good news is with the AI improvement, a lot of non-tech people are really empowered to use,
They use
whatever the AI
non-code,
tool.
low-code.
We have the centralized team is really to help them to form the idea and help them for the things that they cannot think of. For example, many of the non-tech team don't know how important the evaluation is, don't know how to make sure when they access data, whether that's secure enough or not, right? So, and we also set up for workflow toolings like NAN and also Landsmith. There's a lot of technical tools that we support, but it's a very small team. However, I want to really emphasize we also have a centralized operation team. It's also very small. The full-time person is only just 1 person, but she's very, very active, and she's the one who keep track of a weekly status update from every function. Because we let the function to really decide to have the space, but we also kind of have a forcing function, make sure they report status every week. And we also compile the function company-wide email, and all the executives will read that email every week saying, hey, this is the weekly status update. Again, this giving people a little bit pressure that yes, you may have challenges, but look, like everyone's doing it. Yeah.
I think that's very smart. In other words, from the top-down perspective, you have technology help or technology support, as well as operation monitoring and kind of a tracking kind of thing, right? But I
Yep.
do
Discussion topic: turning AI savings into growth and cautious on new tools. Silicon Valley Asian Business Talk.
have a question actually here because you said, when you kind of ask a different functional area to report their progress, their return, they may say, hey, we saved 10 hours or 50% of the time. So from the company's perspective, what's your follow-up? In other words, they say they saved 10 hours or 10% or 20%, 30% kind of a manpowers. Do you have like a follow-up discussions? How do you use that saved hour to do something else? Because to me, this is a kind of very tricky question. If you give pressure to the functional area to show some results or say based upon those saving, it may change the dynamics of those functional areas. So do
Totally.
yeah,
Yep.
just maybe could you elaborate on that part?
Yeah. That's a great question because at the beginning, we struggled with that because, like you said, right? So this part, then what, right? You saved this 10 hours. So
And
what?
so what, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's two parts. One, as a company, we really want to invest our people because I think the people is the biggest assets, and particularly in this age, those are the people who work hard for the company for a while, and they know the context, they love the company, align with the mission. So we want to make sure they kind of improve themselves or they upgrade themselves in the new AI age. When you save the time, and we encourage them to really use the time also to continue to learn AI, continue to expand their understanding,
Oh, good.
and also think about what else you can do, utilize AI. So that's the personal side. But company-wise, this is where the executive meeting happens, and we really talk about early on. We just want to make sure people recognize there's AI benefit. Now
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
actually a time we actually report to board that we will utilize AI and make sure the resource will go back to the efficiency and productivity, which means that we will produce more with the same resource. So our idea is not saying we're going to cut people or something. Instead, we will say, okay, instead of saying grow 30% more people, because we obviously have actually more than 30% or more work to do as the company continue to grow in the business.
Yeah.
And we will say, okay, let's say we want to grow 50% business, and we look at the new project, and instead of let's grow 30%, 40% headcount, can we keep the headcount flat, or can we just grow 10, 15% of headcount, but it can produce more? Now, it is harder to measure exactly, and this is why we provide a lot of transparency of what every function is doing so that their leader, let's say finance or legal, their leader also read the report to say, okay, now I know this part of my function already improved the productivity. How can I think about my new organization and whether move those resources to something else? The good news is the company, with the mission, we have a tremendous opportunity. There's always more to do. Yeah.
That's great. So in other words, I think that will make the conversation more healthy and it's kind of more positive. Basically, it's a growth mindset rather than cutting. Because when you talk about the cutting, it changes the mentality of many people, right?
It is. I think it's very tricky, and I'm very grateful because I work closely with our chief talent officer, and he's also a big AI believer. And from day one, we work together how to make sure the culture and the incentives are correct. However, at the same time, we do want to make sure people know they have to move forward with AI. There's no choice not to learn AI. And like, for example, I can share recently we start to talk more about how to raise the bar. Engineer department and the product department will be the first one say we're gonna change our standard, and if you don't use AI, your productivity will be lag behind, and then we will have to look at your performance. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, now let's kind of switch gear to the bottom up. Because actually, maybe you can share with us your journey about the bottom up, especially actually at one point you talked about a lot of initiatives, a lot of suggestion, recommendation using AI this, using AI that, to the point from your century, kind of a top level perspective, it becomes a little bit chaotic. So you want to centralize, kind of have some control format. Would you elaborate this point? Because I think that's a great point for many company to balance, so-called the bottom up and also kind of the more chaotic, non-directional kind of a process.
Yes, so it's a very, I would say it's a constant discussion. And even yesterday when we have a company meeting and someone say, hey, there's a new tool, when can we use it? This is very constant. I view this as a positive, I would say, force for us to keep updated. But again, good news is we work across the functions, particularly the internal communication department, constantly have a communication with everyone saying, look, all the new tools we are monitor. But we are not, as an enterprise, we're not going to jump on any new tool on the day one. When the new tool gets some momentum, let's say cloud code or cloud core, like everyone's talking about it. From day one, we monitor it, but we are not going to jump on the day one. We will start to have people, we enable them to pilot. Let's say we pick 10 employees, so pilot cloud code for a couple of weeks, and they will write up. And at the same time, we monitor online what's the benefit, what's the risk, and we then also parallel, we talk to the company, the vendor, say where is the enterprise support. We will not allow, and just be very clear, because we are an enterprise and we need to be responsible for our customers and partners. We will not allow any personal license used for the corporate environment. Because
makes sense.
Because the personal one, there's not enough support for monitor, for logging, for security control. But we always work with, say, OpenAI or Anthropic or Google, make sure we use the latest enterprise license to support that. And even for the personal use, we sometimes pick a very corner case, say, okay, you can use, but you have to sign the contract saying, I'm not going to touch any sensitive data. And make sure that there is always a person accountable, not touching any sensible data while they are evaluate and play with the new AI. But in general, I think the key is constant communication. Make sure people know, within the company know, if there is a great, latest, powerful AI tool, they will get to use as soon as we feel it's safe. And we are not going to let them wait, say, half a year. It's most likely it's a few weeks. As soon as we work with security team and a risk team to get it on the early version, we will. But this is a balance of our fiduciary duty to our shareholders and customers, but also enable innovation. But I think in order to make sure those bottom up kind of enthusiasm not quite done, it's a constant communication and constantly show them that what you need can be fulfilled. Just a few more days waiting, or we will suggest a different alternative, right? People will sometimes volunteer, say, hey, there's a new tool doing this. And we'll say, okay, instead of having another, frankly speaking, random startup on board, we say, how about this? Actually, Gemini already provided such a functionality. Have you tried this? And frankly speaking, most of the time it works out. Like people just need a function, some feature. They don't really need a particular startup to get out. And they also understand we cannot onboard any like random startups because of our security concern.
Discussion topic: Managing bottom-up AI request and AI performance evaluation. Silicon Valley Asian Business Talk.
And also, if I understand you correctly, I think at one point you talked about asking the functional area or even individual employees to fill in some kind of form if they are interested in trying something new. But could you kind of elaborate on this kind of forms? Because I think that's an interesting part is, what do you ask these employee or functional department to share the information? In other words, what do you consider when they submit their applications And what's the criteria for you to say yes or no to let these functional areas try? I think that's an interesting question to understand your form kind of a
Yes.
methodology.
Yeah, so I have to say that form was like the first version of form was designed maybe more than a year ago, and things have changed. But the essence is the same. First of all, we want to understand why. Why meaning like what's the benefit, right?
Maybe,
So
Lee, actually, before you continue, let me kind of help the audience to understand the context of the story. Basically, well, maybe you can tell us why you even have to think about the form approach, then continue talking about what you include in the form. So people kind of have this kind of a context understanding.
Totally. So when we started the AI journey, as I said, bottom up, there's a lot of interest of learning and trying out AIs. And then we have employee self-organized Slack group or mailing group, and like more than half of the employees in the company sign up that Slack, and people constantly talking about saying, "Hey, my sister tried this tool; it's really good." Or some vendor suggest me using their new AI feature. It looks good. Can we enable? Because happen to be I also manage the IT group, and we have a pretty tight control. And if we are not approved by IT or security, they cannot even utilize in the corporate environment. So we constantly have those messages in the Slack group. Initially, I assigned someone monitor, but we quickly realized it's a lot of time consuming, and sometimes it's really hard to capture everyone's request. So I decided to say, let's have a AI request intake form. We design the form was designed together with IT and the security team, and also the AI engineer team. And first, I would say, let's understand why. And it cannot be say, I just heard from my sister, it looks cool. That's not gonna work. We has to be have a business need. Because I always say, if you're curious, great, but you always have your own personal laptop to play with. Don't do it in the work environment. But if there's a business need, for example, marketing team say, hey, this is a new tool that will generate the creative or the assets much, much faster so that we can iterate. Sounds like a great business need, right? So now, then we will ask how many people in your function will need that, right? And also have you do a preliminary checking and where, like, who is the vendor and whether they, how much they charge. Are you sure you have the budget? Because I don't control everyone's budget. Your marketing head have to approve, say, okay, we have the budget. But I have to say, in most cases, budget is not a concern. It's more, okay. Then the real question is, with this tool, do you foresee what kind of data this tool need to put in, right? So input the data, right? The security they need to review, are those data sensitive, any customer data or privacy data? So this one thing. And output, okay, do you plan to use this output from this AI tool for production, or you just want to experiment and learn something? That makes a difference. If you say, I'm gonna use the output directly launch on circle.com or whatever, that's a much higher bar. We will have to be sure, say, because we all know the AI is not perfect. So all those considerations you fill in the form, then we will have a quick review. First, approve whether you can do a pilot. Most of the time, people say, I want to learn to then decide whether go in production. Then the key thing is whether the data is sensitive or the control is there. So things like that. But if eventually say this is a tool we can launch in production, that will be a much, frankly speaking, lengthy process to review. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's great. Actually, that's a very interesting story. So I like this kind of a hybrid approach. You let the bottom-up initiative, but you have some kind of a control, right? And also very systematic evaluation. So now let's kind of switch to a different question. Could you kind of talk about how do you, or maybe does your company or different function area monitor the progress, and what is the metrics you use? Because these days, as we all know, kind of evaluation of the AI system to make the system improve is a huge task. So how does your company deal with those kind of evaluation, monitoring, those kind of things?
Yeah, so as I explained earlier, we have a centralized AI engineer team. and they help each functions. Once they decided, they sit down with each functions and help them to build up their workflow. And then mostly importantly, help them to understand how to evaluate them. And internally, we use Smith as the framework, and they set up the evaluation framework. And I think for specific functions, let's say customer service or onboarding and for compliance, it's the hardest part is decide how to evaluate that. And I just recently reviewed one slide. People talk about the golden data is the ceiling. If you cannot have a clear, precise, good evaluation data, it's very hard for the project to be successful, because ultimately you have to have a consistent and clear measurement so that people will feel confident. So that's one thing. And also operationally, as I said, we have a operation team, and frankly speaking, just one or two people really collect all the status and understand where the bottleneck is. And because we have a few functions like behind like later last year, and we recognize that they struggle with the data integration. When functions, let's say finance or talent, they work with Workday, they work with Oracle, and the team will have to understand how to integrate with those vendors, their API to pulling the data. Otherwise, their AI workflow cannot do anything. So pulling all those data, they need technical support. So with that recognition, one of the high priority project our H1 2026 will do is build a unified data fabric across the company to make sure all the important data sources can be integrated, so that the AI developer for each function have an easier time to pull in their data.
Thank you. Actually, I will I'd love to discuss a little bit later, because the interoperability of the different systems. But I think one interesting point talking about some functional area, they struggled of the evaluation because they don't have the high quality or consistent measure. Could you elaborate this? Because I think many other companies may eventually run into the same problem, or maybe they have not even, understand this might be a problem because they are so early. So could you elaborate, what do you mean, good evaluation requires consistent, good measures? Give us some examples to help people better understand this very important issue in the building or monitoring AI system.
Totally. For example, when let's say customer support, right? Initially, the idea is like, wow, every customer email, because we have thousands of them, every customer email, the AI will be smart enough to reply automatically. And by the way, the magic of AI is we also are a global company. And in the past, in order to reply in, let's say, Italian or Spanish, it's really hard. We have to find vendors to translate for us. Now AI is great. Now, however, this is ideal. Now, we all recognize AI is not going to be perfect. So when we first have a prototype, yeah, mostly looks good, but from time to time, actually, often you will say, oh, it's not a good one. Now, then an engineer realized that we haven't defined what is a good, right? And we cannot really say, okay, because it's not good enough, and the project is continue. So initially you say, okay, let's find a better model, or let's tune the model, or let's feed in more context. But you soon realize you cannot keep going because you haven't really defined what is the passing threshold. So then engineer and a PM work with the function leader, say, okay, so how are we going to say when we will feel confident this will be an AI agent running? So then we actually shrink the scope, say we cannot rely on AI to reply all the email, but at least AI can be confidently say, this is a spam email, or this is what do we call it, a one-touch email. The question is so simple, we can really have a very standard email reply. So there are actually 60% of email, either I think it's a 40% spam, and then another 20% is a one simple question. We can have a very standard answer and the customer will be happy. And then the remaining, you will still have AI help you to draft, but a customer support representative will still review and make sure this is the right thing. So you have to go deeper, say, how do you have this if else choice options. Some of the part like AI can be extremely smart and precise. Some like AI will give you help, but you will continue to make a decision. So once you have that, and then we can decide, say, for spend, what is the threshold? Maybe I actually don't know the exact number, but maybe it's 95% or 99% precision, then we will pass. And things like that. So for each of the, like you basically have to go one or two layers deeper, then you recognize where they stuck.
That's great. So in other words, actually, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. You have to be more precise on the definition of a good, bad. So that's, you can track the progress, right?
Yes.
And I think that's fascinating.
Discussion topic Enterprise AI, from prototype to production Silicon Valley Asian business talk.
You touched upon this. Let's continue this theme about transitioning from prototyping to the production phase, meaning production means like a scale up for the AI to use in the mainstream, right? So could you kind of elaborate more the challenges you faced for any kind of AI systems from the prototyping phase to the production phase? What challenges did you face? Why you faced that? And also the lessons learned to avoid, or mitigate such challenges in the future.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, we are still in the middle of it, right? So I think many of our AI effort in past year was majority in the prototyping phase, but some of them already launched in the production, and many of them are still in prototype and going probably production.
Maybe Lee, before you continue, could you kind of give us your company's explanation or version of prototyping production? And in your company, what does that mean? Hey, this kind of AI system or agentic system is in the production. So we have some kind of understanding of this concept in your company's context.
Yeah, so I would say when the production means that the AI workflow or the agent is really doing the work, that I would say the previous workflow changed because they are rely on the AI, right? Prototype means we build things, it's working, but honestly speaking, the real work is still done by the employee, and the employee probably is doing the faster, but their workflow haven't really changed. It's the same step, but each step maybe this person already do much faster, but it haven't really changed because we have to be, again, because of the industry we are in, we want to be very careful and say side by side, we run the AI and also have an employee to run, and we need to compare the result. Quite a few projects launched, and many actually about maybe half is like a side by side close to launch, but there's also haven't even finished. The production meaning, as I said, the workflow already changed. We have one manager actually happily claimed that now I'm managing the agent, not the person doing what I used to have a team doing it.
Oh, that's great. So that's a very clear definition about the production. Basically means the AI workflow will dominate and the people will cooperate with the AI. So that's a production.
Yeah. So our ask for the team is you need to learn to manage agent, because this particular person, the learning is the agent is not like a run you're gonna forget. And we all know AI actually have a kind of like person you also need to manage. You need to monitor the performance, monitor the throughput and the accuracy, and with the underlying model update, and you will need to constantly see whether you should update and tune the golden set and check the evaluation data set, things like that.
Yeah, that's great. So now let's go back to the original question. In this kind of process, do you have any kind of learnings or wisdoms observing the transition or managing the struggling or the challenges from prototyping to the production?
Yes, I think the main learning is because with the centralized team, majority from the engineer org, right? So sometimes the engineer leaders have a hard time to understand, hey, there's a tool, why can't they do it? And I think the learning is the non-tech team, they actually have a strong motivation to learn, but they lack of a formal training, say, understand how to set up evaluation, understand the importance of checking and analyze the data constantly, because they sometimes have a default assumption, say, hey, it's working, and then now I can forget about this. And that's wrong, because you need to, as the owner, you need to constantly make sure your evaluation data and the context is updated. So those are mindset change, because engineer knew, even if you launch a production service, you need to have a monitor dashboard. This is a training for engineer, but it's not a training for non-tech people. That's one thing. Yeah.
That's great. Actually, could you kind of, because you mentioned for the non-tech, like a functional area, non-tech functional area, they need to constantly monitoring. And one of the reasons you say the context has changed. What do you mean by that? Like, give us an example. The context change requires the non-functional team or tech teams to constantly monitor. What do you mean by that? Because of
Yes,
context
for
change.
we always say if you don't have the right context, the AI will not make a right decision, right?
Yes.
For example, we one of the big AI project is we try to really have automated and efficient onboarding process. Again, we are in a fintech and we have a very rigorous onboarding for our customers and the future
Yeah.
partners. We do like a very long checking on every perspective. And in the past, it's very labor intensive. Utilizing AI, a lot of the things automated, but at the end of the day, because regulations keep changing. And
Oh,
also, when the online system, like there's a lot of misinformation because we do a lot of checking by online research. So without updating your understanding of the current rule, without understanding your understanding of how people manipulate the online information, your AI work cannot stand still. So you have to constantly feed and say, hey, okay, now this is the latest rule from NYDFS, or this is the latest privacy constraint you have to follow. Things like that. But basically, those are the things that's not going to sit still. In the past, there's a human being constantly on top of that. Right now, we still need some human being, but hopefully the person's job is much easier. It just like a need to make sure that the AI system is updated. Yeah.
now it makes perfect sense because you basically ask AI agent systems to kind of modify its behavior, its decisions based upon the real situation, because the real
Yes.
situation say always changes. That is great, actually. Maybe let's kind of move on to the next question, because you talked about the AI agent multiple times, and there are a lot of discussions about the pros and cons of using AI agents. So could you kind of elaborate this? For example, we hear some discussions about Anthropic. They basically recommend do not use many agents because each agent has its own limitations. Could be costly. So they recommend using less agent and one agent use multiple skills and things like that. So do you have any kind of a sharing about using agents in your workflow systems, deploying agents using in your workflow systems?
Yeah. So I will say that whatever we learned today is extremely early. Because of the industry we're in, at least on even the production systems, I want to emphasize right now, even though AI, like some of the workflow AI does most of the work, but we ultimately have a human in the loop. Now, sometimes it's a human at the last step to make sure. Sometimes there's a human in a couple of a critical step, but we want to make sure there's a human in the loop so far. Now, it's not like I don't believe AI is powerful, but because the industry and also I believe the AI is constantly improving, and I do not want to lose track of what's producing and what's like not lacking. So we, in some way, I don't think we have reached a point like a multiple agent talk to each other, not yet, right? And I do think this year we're gonna do a lot of experiment, but I cannot really comment on how dangerous, because I personally, within our enterprise, there's not much of that part of experience. But I do want to say that at this point, I do think a senior leader, let's say either in tech or in compliance, their experience judgment are still very important. It's a very early stage of AI in enterprise. I think AI learn from the right people are very important because that's, again, depend on where to learn, right? So I think in many cases, it's too early to let AI do it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I got the same sense because if you look at some media, they talk about the orchestration as very hot concept, like an agent managing multiple agents. But it seems to me actually based upon the real practice, it's a little bit too early for many.
I definitely, at least for us, is a little bit too early. Now, I do believe this year it's very likely we will start. Right now, I can just be honest, we have senior leaders or senior tech engineers are orchestrated some of the agent. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very honest and also very valuable kind of advice.
Discussion topic helping/motivating people to adopt enterprise AI Silicon Valley Asian business talk.
The next question, because earlier you talked about multiple times the workflow, in other words, actually, let's call it kind of an AI ready or AI enabled workflow. And naturally, people will think about those workflow will be different from the traditional human workflow. And, so people tend to think about the gaps, the difference, the conflicts, which causes the people, the employee to push back or not willing to make change. So I would like to ask your experience on this. Do you encounter such kind of a gaps between the traditional human workflow versus the AI-enabled workflow? And if you do encounter this kind of a conflict or even pushback, and how do you resolve that? Could you elaborate on that part?
Yeah, so I would say there's a difference, and I do see people's understanding might be different, and it takes a lot of some of the training and education, but less on the pushback. Let me elaborate. I think when we start the journey, we do recognize some of the function, their understanding of AI, frankly speaking, is more at the automation. It's less on the AI intelligence. I recognize they don't understand the difference of automation and AI making the intelligent decision, but that's okay. I keep telling my AI team, don't worry. Even if people conflict together, first thing is, even if just automation is a great step forward. Because my goal, I tell the AI transformation team, the goal ultimately is not to say, again, using AI for the sake of AI. The goal is to make sure that companies can move more efficiently, productive, and utilize AI whenever people feel like they can
It's
use
a tool. Ultimately, it's a tool, right?
It's ultimately still a tool right now. And we constantly make sure people understand what you need to achieve is not looking for places to plug in AI. Instead of you need to think of a different way. Say, okay, this is my job. My job is not 10 steps of this process. My job is to ultimately achieve that goal. In the past, maybe you need to do 10 steps, but now knowing all the examples and the trainings we give to you, how can you redesign a workflow and plug in AI? Now that again takes some training and iteration, but the most important thing is to let people focus on the ultimate goal and the jobs to be done instead of focus on what they've been doing. I think that switch is a little bit tricky, and some people get it immediately, some people don't, because they were like, oh, how can I make sure that step is not slow or something? But even with that, I keep telling my engineer, don't feel frustrated. That's already a step forward. So you have to have the empathy how people think. And I do feel what's very effective is show them examples. One thing I feel very effective is we run company-wide show and tell. We have all hands and make sure, we actually make sure that the winning teams, many are from non-tech team, and people just share like what they use AI, and you give other people ideas. We have company-wide hackathon, and I encourage engineer pair with non-engineer team because non-engineer team have a lot of ideas, they just don't know how to do it. So I think that also, again, give people a lot of creative ideas, say, oh, I didn't know AI can do this. So you just need to push, give them ideas, and then more and more people will get on the wagon. I think the challenge is not pushback, say, I don't want to change it. It's more of a struggle, say, I don't have time. Because when my big boss say, you should do this job. Now there's two options, right? You do your own way and you know exactly how to do it. Or you say, hey, maybe I can rethink about how to AI solve it, but you don't know when and how fast AI can help you. You kind of have a sense AI will be better, but you don't know. And if the boss say, I need you finish it within a week, a lot of people will fall back to say, okay, let me do my old way. You know what I mean? So it's
very safe, yes.
Very safe. So to do that, and again, I would say we do have a top-down mandate and a support. Our talent team design, we have a recharge day I think it's every quarter. And for example, end of last year, we have the whole week encourage people say, this is a week, we call it recharge week. It's not for you to take a vacation. Instead, we want you to utilize that whole week, to improve yourself, pick up a new skill. Most likely, we want you to learn AI and learn in your space how AI can help you. And there's no definition of what you're going to do, but we just want to make sure that you do something that you improve your AI skill. So with all those support, and we can tell people, say, from the new year, now we give you, and also we're going to we do quarterly training, we do monthly all hands meeting to constant tell people that what's the new AI update and the new AI tool is supported here, so that you make sure that you know you have the best support in the company. But the struggle is there. I just want to acknowledge that. But again, the leaders, and my job is to encourage the leaders so that they can encourage their team to say, hey, take a step backwards, and not take a step back and think about what can I improve my AI skills so that I can do this job differently.
Right. So actually, now talking about this, Uli, you mentioned about now you put the, adopting AI as part of the KPI or OKR. Could you give us one or two examples of what's in the OKR? Because I can also feel that give some kind of pressure to the functional leader to adopt the AI in the area. So could you give us an example, maybe one or two example about what do you put in the OKR to, encourage them or even force them to adopt AI?
Yeah, so I can share, like, say, last half years, like 2025, the later half's OKR. We have one calling out the engineer productivity improvement, and the measurement is very clear. The ticket closing rate needs to be 15%. We actually exceeded with like 28% ticket closing time. So we exceeded the OKR. We have an OKR to say every function have at least 2 workflow that utilize AI.
That's a very numerical measure.
Very numeric, and also I believe at least 20% improvement in terms of productivity. Now, that again, the productivity definition, we let the function to define. It can be time, it can be resource engaged. So every function is different, but we have a central tracking, right? I think we achieved 70% project reach that goal, and there's like 10 or 20% delayed because of something else. We allow delayed things happen, and as long as we know why. Again, I think the transparency is the most important thing. And things happen. I always say OKR is not meant to be 100% achieved.
No,
but
right.
OKR is a way to be transparent and let other people to monitor what you do. So I think that's how we achieve that. Yeah.
I think that's great. Actually, that kind of is very valuable insights to help our students learn, as well as other companies to kind of manage this journey.
Discussion topic: Enterprise AI context change and vendor access challenges. Silicon Valley Asian business talk.
Let's kind of look at the next very big questions, because you talked about many times the AI agent need to or depend upon the context knowledge. Context knowledge could be the regulations, the company's history documents, the policy document, the past cases. But of course, we understand the quality. First of all, the availability of such documents or knowledge, the quality of those knowledge is very crucial. Could you elaborate, did you encounter this context knowledge issue, and how do you kind of resolve those issues? In other words, maybe give the audience some kind of advice how to manage the context, how to improve the context so the AI agent can do a good job.
Yeah, very good question, and it's a very difficult question. I won't say I totally solve it. We are in the middle of it, but I can totally appreciate the difficulty. I give you example. We are, I call ourselves a mid-sized enterprise company. We're a technology company by nature, but we are also in the financial world that, traditionally just there's a lot of regulated and sensitive data around. I happen to manage the IT department, so I have a very clear view how many vendors we work with. We have close to 100 vendors. There's a lot of big vendors you can think of: Workday, Salesforce, HubSpot, Oracle, and whatever. There's also a long tail of small vendors each department to utilize to help their work. Now, when you talk about the context and think about you have to pull in all those vendors' data, and each API and whatever access control are different. So it's a tremendous work. But if you don't really get, say, Salesforce or Oracle data in, the functions cannot really have the right context, right?
Yeah.
So in theory, they all doable. It's just a lot of engineer work. And also what's more complicated is because we in our industry, we need to make sure data leakage is very tightly controlled. We need to know who's using data, who's reading, who's writing, and what if and regulator would want to see the trace, things like that. So
yeah.
when I actually have an AI offsite 2 weeks ago, a lot of time we actually spent when we're pulling those vendors, what kind of access control we need to respect. And of course, Oracle, Salesforce, they have a pretty robust support. For smaller vendors, they don't even know how to deal with AI agent. If I design an agent and I want to access a random vendor's data, I don't even know the vendor can take whatever ID, a fake ID. It's not a user. What can they do? So things like that, we have to decide. So I think the solution, not really a solution, at least approach is, we do have a small team, and we're going to design for this year. The top priority project for AI team is to design a data fabric. And I told the team, we are not going to cover 100 vendors, but instead we have a list of a priority. Those are 20, 30 vendors most of our functions really rely on. So make sure we support those vendors. We understand their API. We know how to pull in their data with the right control and monitor, and provide a unified AI access layer, data access layer, so that different functions can utilize that AI. And we will control who can read, who can write. It's not an easy project. We just started. And then meanwhile, for each function, they do have a smaller scale of agent running just to utilize their data, right? So that is more controlled. When I say build a data fabric, is attempt to integrate all the data together so that we, as let's say CEO executive, we can read all the data without worry about security. So that's a next step we are working on, but it's a real problem. It's actually, there's no easy solution. You just have to decide how you're going to tackle it.
That's a great question. So that also kind of leads to the other questions called the interoperability of different data systems. So if I understand you correctly, you basically say, first, in your vendor example, you kind of prioritize the vendors, focusing on the top, let's say, most important 30 or 40, whatever the number. Then make sure you have access to these vendors, like the APIs, and also which another very important thing is who have access, like control access control, right?
Mm-hmm.
and also make sure the other side knows, allows you to extract the data, things like that.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of leads to a very interesting question about the enterprise AI. So it is no longer a one company game. It is you have to work with that partners. If your partner's not ready, you're kind of stuck with that kind of a situation.
Yes, I do think so. So honest speaking, it is, I don't know, it's a good or
It's kind of
bad, but if
ecosystem
we
issue.
in generally that leads us to favor big, more mature vendors.
Mm.
Right? For example, at least half of our data already live in the Google universe, right? So the Google Doc or Gmail or something that makes Google a much more attractive vendor, generally speaking, because anyway, a lot of data is already there, right? If you have a new vendor, let's say maybe your model is more powerful, but then consider I have to integrate all the different data sources. That's something I have to consider. Now, not because I'm biased, but those are the practical considerations. But fortunately, of course, we have other vendors like, say, Microsoft or OpenAI also work very closely with us. So good things, we still have choices. But I will say one of the trend is, unfortunately, people like us will hope like kind of prefer more mature vendors for the data read.
Kind of gravitated to the incumbents, the well-established platform.
Yeah, so I don't know, but we obviously were very open all the startups. But when startups talk to me, the first question I always have is, how do you monitor, control data access? Do you have an on-prem solution? Again, it's possible that's because we are a fintech. Maybe some other industry may not be like care that much, but for us, this is a major concern.
No, I think this is not uncommon, and it's kind of interesting. I also see an opportunity for new startup companies to help startup companies to be ready to, kind of work with their customers, large customers like you guys, who have a very high demand on the data security, data control, those kind of things. Before I kind of move on to the next question, do you also run into kind of other issues about the historical documents of the company, the policy documents, because the way it was written, the way it was kind of illustrated in the past document does not fit with the AI agent requirements, and you have to rework on those documents.
Oh yeah, totally. I think that some of the rules doesn't apply to, frankly speaking, AI age at all. Now,
Oh,
again, I feel very lucky is from day one. There's two leaders I work very closely. One is the head of a talent because it's a big cultural shift. The other is our chief risk officer who also manages security and privacy, right? And he's the one who from day one, we have regular meetings say, okay, this is a rule that we know we should enforce, but obviously those rules are not applying AI. And he has a very strong, capable leaders work with my AI team to devise the policy, and he and I will review together and approve the new policy because we have to look forward.
yeah, they want to learn as well. Yeah, that's
Yes.
very good point. The other question I think you already touched upon about how to integrate with the external vendor database, so that all the functional area can have secure access, easy access. But do you have the situation where the company's internal IT system, internal database, originally it was siloed, for example, but now because of the AI agent, because this is something I learned. One of the key benefit for take advantage of the AI system is to more integrate it rather than silo. But traditional systems tend to be silo. And so do you face that kind of a situation? Then how do you address those kind of situation, make them less silo and more integrated?
So yes, but I think the silo part is mostly outside of vendors. The
Oh,
internal database, like build, I think it's in my situation, it's easier because I manage all the engineers. It's all built
oh,
by
I
my
see.
team, so it doesn't matter. If I say you need to integrate, that they will integrate. So it's
Oh,
more of
okay.
a saying, okay, we need to do. I think the harder part is by third-party vendors. So then and also some of the those vendor database are owned by other functions. So we need to talk to the other function to make sure we are on the same page. I do think in general, everyone's on the same page. And I think with all the education. Everyone knows the context and data is important. Otherwise, AI will not function well. It's a matter of priority for that function, whether they're going to do it immediately or it's like 1 month later, this kind of thing. Yeah.
Actually, maybe this is kind of a new question I had. Do you encounter some kind of challenges when you work with external kind of partners or suppliers or vendors to kind of make their data open, more secure for you to access? Do you encounter any kind of issues or lessons? Maybe which I think could be very, very valuable lesson when company approach these external partner for that exact same purpose.
Yeah, I don't think it's more of open or not open. It's more of feature support. I give you an example. I think the common lack of a feature support is how do you recognize it's an AI agent, not a user, right?
Oh,
Most of a traditional database, they give you a access control, whatever tuning is about this user can this do that and that. But what if this is an AI agent? Right. So now we can work around and say it's a fake user or something, but then I have to change Workday to make sure because a lot of access control, let's say it's connected with Workday. If you're a manager, you can do this. If you're not, and whatever. But if it's a fake AI agent, what are you going to do? So I think that is one question. The other question, I will say the other question is certain features. Right. So in the traditional way, there's a certain features that can you allow this? And one feature, for example, is can you allow monitor per user or because there's some small vendors give you only the organization level or access log or access monitor. They don't really have a very detailed monitor or logging system for each one of them. But for us, it's important because the security team need to know when things happen, they need to exactly pinpoint where. And then some of the vendors just they don't support. So it's less about they are not willing, they just don't have that feature. So we started a Cursor early, for example. Even Cursor at the beginning, they don't have monitor. And like, I cannot use you if you don't give me the monitor because I really need to know which engineer use Cursor in what way. So I think that all those are like we are learning along the way. Yeah.
So in other words, actually, you have to kind of get the permission because I can imagine the vendors, they also have the priority issues, whether they kind of change their kind of engineer work to accommodate your requirement, because for them, it's also resource allocation issues.
Yes, exactly. So I understand them. Like I understand like we may, as I said, even OpenAI in early days, we have to keep asking, can you provide this feature, that feature? And I also understand they have way too many other enterprise feature to support. So yeah.
So in other words, actually, if the vendor is not willing to change right now, in other words, you cannot fully take advantage of AI systems.
Well, I think again, those are the judgment you start to like have to insert. Sometimes if they promise they're gonna do within a month, I will let them go. And meanwhile, our internal engineer, for example, hack some way. And so hack some way. For example, if like a Cursor don't have the monitor, we put an internal proxy, interject the traffic. So we do our own logging. It's not ideal because it's inefficient, but that's a bridge. So we don't sacrifice security, but still let engineers start to use Cursor early on. Yeah.
So I understand the struggle, the delicate balance.
Discussion topic: Enterprise AI context change and vendor access challenges. Silicon Valley Asian business talk.
The next question, which is a very big question, because every enterprise kind of AI system faces this hallucination issue. It means many, many things, right? But they talk about many kind of solutions. But does your company use certain techniques, such as kind of the metadata, the workflow design, or some kind of methodologies to reduce hallucination to ensure the quality of AI system in your company? So what are some of the technical methods you use?
Yeah. Great question. I do think the most important thing is to evaluate and recognize hallucinating.
Evaluate and recognize.
Evaluate, because I think that's important recognition. And I think if you don't measure them correctly, it's harder because when you have, let's say you upgrade the model, or like at the early on, it's so funny. Like if early on, the most effective way is to only two things: is upgrade model or add more context. To be honest, that's like just make sure that the AI has more context. And then for certain project, we have to do a little bit of fine tuning ourselves. But the majority of the project is really about giving the right context. But I do think the most challenging is make sure that people understand how to really recognize a hallucination. And the good news is because we insist, like I just said early, insist still human in the loop, even if it's just one last step, the humans will check, say, hey, it's wrong. And then when it's wrong, we try to understand which part is wrong. Is it because the context is wrong or just AI just makes shit up, right? So that happens. So then we try to figure out why. Sometimes it's I sometimes call it a little trick. For example, we try to say if the engineer try to recommend engineer say if you use this tool, let's say use Cloud Code to code your make your code suggestion or development, you may want to consider using another model to do code review because we also do AI code review, and you may want to use, let's say, Gemini as the model backend to do code review. So counterbalance. But at the end of the day, before you check your code, we still require a human to review because we want a name attached it. If there's anything wrong, we want a human to be able to.
Oh, that's transparency.
That's still right now, and I understand that this is in some way a slowdown part because you need require human. But right now we haven't let it go because still early, and also in the industry we need to be extra careful. Yeah.
So actually, could you say a few kind of add a few clarification when you say context? Because earlier you said you maybe add more context to reduce the hallucination or manage the right context. Could you kind of do you learn something about so-called providing the right context? What do you mean by that? It's not because I heard some discussion say if you provide too much context, it may confuse AI systems. I don't know whether
it could, but I have to say this is the part. One thing I emphasize with our team is you have to have a growth mindset and try out the latest AI at least every 2 weeks. Because half a year ago, I can totally see that. But frankly speaking, the latest AI model and the tools are so intelligent. I think that requirement is lower and lower, but still context matters. I give you an example, like early on, let's say half a year ago, the AI will suggest a lot of code. And they will call some API. I'm like, wait, that API is obsolete. It's no longer used. So we will have to tell AI, say, no, you focus on this set of API you can call. Don't go randomly call some API we already obsolete or something. So you need to correct it. So give them the right one. If the beginning when engineers don't know how to give the correct context, is sometimes like, okay, do that for me. But if you don't tell them what's the best practice, and by the way, AI will be overly enthusiastic, do too many things for you. So I think those are the things we start to learn how to let them do the right thing. But it's literally like manage a new hire. You do need a good manager really need to give the right context. Yeah.
I think there are 2 points from your point. One is the good news is these days AI models getting smarter and smarter, meaning they are more able to handle very messy context document. That's a good news for all the companies. But on the other hand, you also mentioned even with the very smart AI machines, right prompt, right instruction is still very, very important.
Yes.
Right. So that kind of right and prompt, the right instruction that's still there.
Yes. And I think what organization can do is make sure that when there's also fundamental layer of data, you don't have to every time rely on people to give it to it. If you can have the right data fabric built up, which we are building right now, then you will save a lot of time for each individual to give the right context. But no matter what, I think the right manager in some way in here, like the manager for the AI agent, will still need to be very clear and precise on what you want to achieve, what are the constraints you want the agent to have.
But it seems to me also, based upon your early discussion, so-called these good managers or good instructions or prompts, it does not come from blue, not nowhere. It comes from their learning, come from their observation of the mistakes the AI agent make. Then they say, oh, I need to change my instruction, or I need to tell AI system this way. Is that correct?
Partially. I think partly to make if I say like who makes up those good AI agent managers, the first most important thing is this person actually understand the function need very well, right? So a good architect in engineer is always a good architect. And learning the AI, how to talk to AI, it's actually the easier part.
Okay, so I mean, in other words, actually have a clear understanding of the objective,
Exactly. Clear understanding objective, clear understanding in the system, ultimately where the complexity and the common pitfalls are. It's more important than say learning. But learning the AI, the tricks of how to deal with AI is also important. But to be honest, in my observations, that's the easier part to wrap up.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you.
Discussion topic: Enterprise AI talent and organizational shifts. Silicon Valley Asian business talk.
The next question is about the people and organizational issue, because a lot of people are talking about the kind of change management. I put it in the later part because I felt this kind of a cliche a lot of people talk about, but still maybe I want to get your kind of a point of view. But more specifically, as we know, AI systems getting basically tearing down the wall, the organization wall, getting more different department divisions more integrated, rather than less siloed. So have you kind of encountered this kind of issue because they're using the AI system, so the company need to rethink about their structure, organizational structure, responsibilities, even hierarchies, things like that?
I think we constantly thinking about it. We definitely recognize the change is coming, but at this point we haven't change yet.
Get to that point.
But the leaders already recognize, and I think again, I feel in Circle, I feel very grateful is because the top down understanding and also the commitment to AI is extremely strong. And so when you have a CEO and a top level leaders fully buy in, even if we are not there yet, it will happen. The only reason it haven't there yet, because I always believe that we don't do that for the sake of doing that.
Yeah.
Right. And I do see we are moving towards that direction, but I haven't reached the threshold. It's like a big reorg yet. But we all recognize there's a lot of job function made, like their division line is blurred, but that's okay. Right now, fortunately, the company is like growing, the business need, so everyone has so much to do. So in terms of like a job security, it's a less of concern, more of like you really need to up your skills so that you can expand your scope. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, I agree. Actually, there's some more strategic level thinking about the reorganizing the structure of the functions to fully take advantage of the AI system. But based upon your observation, even though your company has not reached that point, the reorg to fully take advantage of AI, but do you have any observations about, or maybe examples about potentially you think the AI agent or agentic systems is going to make what kind of functions more integrated or more kind of less siloed? Do you have any observation on that?
Yeah, totally. For example, the product and the engine, and the particular, let's say, very obvious example is like say designer and a UX front engineer, right? Front end engineer. If the designers can be trained to do vibe coding, the need for a front end engineer to do the iteration for it is much less so. So the only reason front-end engineer will come in place is when you need to launch a production and the engineer have more experience of deploy things and whatever, right? And also, like say between data scientists and data analysts, one is focused on more kind of a deep analysis. The other is to build a business dashboard and this kind of thing. And when the dashboard building is so much easier, now we still blur the line. Do I need these two teams, or maybe there's the same team? So all those things we constantly thinking. But again, right now we don't have like urgent need. We have to do the reorg. I just encourage people to really just do whatever you can to learn the AI that helps you to upgrade your skill set. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting because I know I do have a new question which relates to the young people. But I heard actually with the development of AI, there's a new term called the full stack jobs, meaning you're no longer doing one particular piece of this whole thing. It seems to me what you're talking about that, right? You're talking
Yes.
about upstream job, downstream job, combine them together, you take it over, and the AI help you.
Yes, exactly. So I think, frankly speaking, the full stack, not just a full stack engineer, right? Some smart engineer can learn the PM skills because what PM do, they understand the market, they try to write a feature design doc. And if you use AI, you understand the ultimate goal, engineer can do that. And then
Yeah.
reversely, the PM can utilize AI to do vibe coding most of the things. In the past, we say,
Yeah.
oh, only the front end. No, right now the AI is very much smart enough to write some backend. Now it's a matter of time whether they will recognize the performance, recognize scalability, and be able to work with the security system, things like that. I think again, the line is blurred, and the people who have the most flexible mindset to pick up a different skill is eventually going to be the most powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, I know we are reaching the time limit. Do you think we missed any other challenges? Actually, you think it's very important, but we didn't cover so far for enterprises to
Yeah,
adopt
so I
technology?
do think you covered pretty much everything. I do want to emphasize that for enterprise to adopt AI, the top down and at the top down with the right mindset is very important. I
The
feel
leadership. Mm.
pretty lucky that with the strong mandate, but also more practical approach, right? Because the CEOs and the founders, like obviously they want to reach the final state right away, right? So, and there's a lot of talk saying AI, you will shrink your workforce and make it efficient. And then I think fortunately our CEO and the company recognize it's a journey. It's also it's a time for us to really work with the employees instead of only look at the money. So I feel like pretty lucky that we, as a leadership, we have the mindset. So we will push hard, but also give time and space. I think
That's a
that's
great
important.
point. That's great. So in other words, actually, you have like a strong mandate, strong vision, but in terms of the implementation, you use the word practical, meaning willing to learn, willing to try, and being flexible and give different functional areas some flexibility to try their own thing with some kind of a discipline. Because I like your approach of the OKR to give people soft pressure. I
Yep,
understand that,
yep, yep.
right? So maybe, my last question, for young people, because I deal with a lot of young people who are very anxious about the AI replacing their jobs, where do you see the opportunities, professional career opportunities for young people? Maybe let me kind of reframe this question because my philosophy is wherever a company face a lot of pain, uh, a lot of struggles, typically they need people. So if we combine these two questions together, what's your advice to young people who are very worried about their future career opportunities, especially with AI? What do you think? Where are the opportunities?
Yeah, I think that there's two, like if you look at just the AI field and they were because I'm a computer engineer by training, right? There was a time, and I was a part of the lucky group, is engineers, computer engineering itself is a super, super important domain of skill that
Yeah.
there's a lot of demand. I think that demand definitely itself, like a programming itself, the demand reduced because of AI. However, the real computer scientist who can design a system, who really understand the architect, or who understand like how to put things together, like put multiple agents together, that
Like a
is still
full
a high
stack.
demand. That's a high demand. And also the other side is that the model engineer to understand how you really leverage hardware, software trade-off, and then you see the prolific the AI papers that will advance the efficiency and the capability faster. So if you are really deep in the area, you're still very safe. But if you say, oh, I know Java, oh, I know Python, that will give me a job, that day is gone. But I know so many talented people really, really want to do deep research on algorithm, data structure, or whatever. I think they're still safe. On the other side is there's so many verticals that wait to be updated, right? There is Harvey, like AI for legal. There is Cursor, AI for developer. There is Open Verify, AI for medical society. The vertical AI is a tremendous opportunity if you know how to program, has a great engineer, and also passionate about certain vertical. That is a huge promising environment, like for you to, like for example, we are like intersection of finance and technology. If you understand how the financial system works, if you understand the blockchain, we still have hiring to do, right? But if you say I'm a good coder itself, it's probably not going to go too far. Does it make sense? Yeah.
No, it makes a lot of sense. So, because actually I was thinking, we deal with a lot of business students, actually in the business background. It could be they are interested in HR, supply chain, or maybe customer service. So if following your early talk about the finance example, and a vertical example, basically you're saying, if these people, they have deep domain knowledge, but they also know the AI, so they can help their domain department, domain space to transform, to prepare for the AI system. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, I think that demand is only going to be higher.
Oh,
Yeah, because we need a lot of those people who, as I said, our engineers in high demand because every function say, Lee, can you give me engineer support doing this? They want that, but my engineer alone, they don't understand, say, the legal or HR
domain, yes, yes,
right? They don't
yes.
need that domain. So we have to pair them together. But
Yeah,
consider
that's
if
a
you
good
have
point.
expert knowing both.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you for watching.